Hey guys, so this video we are going to talk about biography, autobiography, and memoir again, but how they are actually arguments. So you might say, like it says on this slide, wait, what do you mean argument? Well, I do not mean people like yelling at each other or anything like that. I mean the technical language arts definition of argument. So, an argument means, if you read on the left hand side here, a well thought out way to try to persuade others that an idea, belief, or action is right. So, every time you try to persuade someone of something else, either that snow is horrible, or sunlight is best, or where you should go on a beach vacation, technically that is a type of argument. It does not mean people yelling at each other, okay? What it does mean, especially in books, is that it has some kind of overarching theme, a theme that goes throughout the entire thing, and that everything really goes back to that theme. So nonfiction books really do have arguments, okay? So I want you to think of it this way. If you are asked, and you need to try to figure out what the argument of a nonfiction book is. So what is the argument of a biography, autobiography, or memoir? I want you to think of it this way. What is that book trying to prove? If you're reading a biography of George Washington, what is the book trying to prove about George Washington? If you are reading a memoir of Mrs. Hogan, what is that book trying to prove was important? So that is what the main argument of the book is. Think of it this way. What is the book trying to prove? So I want you to remember, you learned this back in playlist 1, all 3 of these types of books have these overarching, I'm putting it in quotes, themes, because it's not necessarily theme like what we talked about in fiction. But it's like the big idea that goes through the entire book. So biographies always argue why someone was an important figure in history. That is the big deal about biographies. So if I'm reading about George Washington, it's going to argue George Washington was an important figure in history because X, Y, and Z. And that's the argument of the George Washington biography. I write an autobiography about myself, when I'm 90 and I've done all these amazing things. The argument would be why Mrs. Hogan is an important figure in history because I taught the next 3 presidents, right? So I would have that argument. Memoirs are a little different, okay? Memoirs argue for a lesson that the author has learned that you, the reader, should apply to your life. So if I wrote a memoir about my time in graduate school and about how stressful it was and about how I took it too seriously, the argument of that book would be that you should take that if you are going to grad school and not take it too seriously and not be stressed out, okay? So you can see that biographies and autobiographies have very similar arguments about why someone is or was an important figure in history. Memoirs are arguing for whatever the author learned for their life, how the reader can take that and apply to their lives. So let's read this together. It's been almost 10 years since I first ran for political office. I was 35 at the time. 4 years out of law school, recently married, and generally impatient with life. A seat in the Illinois legislature had opened up, and several friends suggested that I run, thinking that my work as a civil rights lawyer and contacts from my days as a community organizer would make me a viable candidate. After discussing it with my wife, I entered the race and proceeded to do what every first-time candidate does. I talked to anyone who would listen. I went to block club meetings and church socials, beauty shops and barbershops. If 2 guys were standing on a corner, I would cross the street to hand them campaign literature. So this is an excerpt from President Obama's autobiography. So let's think. What was the argument of that paragraph? What were they trying to prove? That's that question. What was he trying to prove in that paragraph? And if you look at the things that I highlighted in blue, I really think those are some clues. He said he discussed it with his wife. He talked to anyone who would listen. And then he gave lots of examples of how he was talking to people and asking them questions. I think that the argument he was trying to make was that he was curious. So, just a few reminders here to summarize. Biographies are arguing, they're trying to prove that the person that the book is about was a historically significant person. That's what all biographies are trying to prove. Your job when reading a biography is trying to figure out why were they a historically significant person. Autobiographies are arguing the same thing, but they're proving that the author, right, because it's an autobiography, is historically significant. So your job when reading autobiographies is to figure out why they are saying that they're a historically significant person. Now remember, memoirs are a little different. So memoirs aren't arguing that the person is historically significant or not. What they are arguing, they're trying to prove that their life experience is useful and that you, the reader, can learn from it. So the next time you think of an argument, don't think of people yelling. Think of how that book is trying to prove something. So ask yourself this question: what is the book trying to prove?